Welcome to the Culinary Now podcast. I'm Jamie Schick,
And I'm Matt Britt.
and today we are joined by our fellow colleague, Jaime Houghton, who is a department chair for the Culinary Arts Department. He's also a certified judge and table captain from the Kansas City BBQ Society. And
The
I know you
real
have a lot more
deal.
other I know you have a lot more other accolades, Jeremy, but thank you so much for joining us today to talk about summer barbecue.
This is great. Thank you both for having me.
And I'm so happy we caught you because I know you're like jet setting to Spain in like a week or so. Super jealous. But while we have you in the States, we want to talk to you about sort of our theme for the summer, which is just, sort of summer backyard barbecue. Your level is a different story. I mean, you're a Kansas City barbecue table captain, which sounds overly elite. But I want to bring it back down a little bit because, we had an episode that came out right before this that kind of talked just about general backyard barbecue etiquette. But as we dive into the actual star of the show, like the barbecue itself, why is barbecue so like identifiable in America? And like, why do people love it so much? And like, what is barbecue to you as someone who's sort of at the next level?
Well, it's interesting because when you look at the history of what barbecue is, we've been cooking over fire for, over a million years, and it has progressed to different cultures. Every culture does it. So it's something that we all share as a human race, regardless of your background, as one way to cook. And here in the United States, it's morphed into, I think, social gatherings for family, friends, outdoors, having a drink, standing there while that smokes. I'm the type of person wherever I walk, it seems like that smoke always follows. And I'm sure there's some people who are listening are the same way. Like, I swear I sit there and it follows me, but it's that social gathering of being outside, cooking, and it takes time. And as you barbecue or you grill, you're outside and it takes a little bit of time. And during that time is an opportunity to be social. And I think that's why during the summers, you see so many people doing the barbecues and cooking and having that opportunity to spend with friends, families, people you don't even know. And if you go to a competition and you go to a barbecue, even, food trucks when they have barbecue and you just taste it, it's a chance to have that conversation. Is this too spicy? Is it too smoky? What smoke did they use? Is it North Carolina? Is it South Carolina? Is it Texas style? There's lots of conversations that can come from simply throwing something on a grill and barbecuing.
And I think that before we get into all of that, we should kind of define what barbecue really is, because I know that when I grew up, my mom would use the term, we're going to barbecue, but really she just meant she's putting stuff on the grill, but it didn't necessarily mean it was going to be in barbecue sauce or smoked or anything like that. So I think we should start with the definition of what barbecuing is and then get into all of this really cool nuance.
Definitely. And I think this is where you'll find a little bit of a gray area. And I think it's cultural and where you were brought up. So if you were over in Asia and you barbecue or you're doing something like a bulgogi and you're cooking it, that marinated beef, on an open fire, we call it a barbecue. Here in the United States, just like Chef Schick said, you probably at some point have been around friends or somebody that was like, oh, we're going to barbecue. And you're like, oh, great. You're going to start at 6, 7 in the morning. They're like, no, we're going to throw burgers on the, you're like, oh, okay. So that kind of barbecue. So you're right. And I think from a culinary and a chef standpoint and somebody who is, through the Kansas City BBQ Society, somebody who's done it, to me, what really barbecue is a couple of things. One, slow cooking. It's not meant to be fast. And both of you as chefs know that, when it comes to the science, which we'll dive into a little bit later on, it does take time. You can't throw something on high heat and expect that reaction to be the same. The meat, the collagen, the connective tissue, all that sort of stuff that needs to break down and render and make it nice and soft. The other, which is really kind of, I think, the defining what you might say if you're going to step back, is enclosure. So with a barbecue, it's indirect heat usually. So what that means is you have the fire off to one side and you have the meat, and then you have ventilation off to the side, so that ventilation pulls the smoke, pulls the heat out and you can regulate the temperature better. And the science part of it is for that brisket. That's a tough piece of meat, from the front part of that animal. They don't have a collarbone, so it makes it a little bit tough when they walk. We have that ability to have that connective where it's easier for us, so it's a little bit more tender. But in a cow, they don't have that, so all that weight is on that brisket. So to cook it effectively, I can't just throw it on a grill, because that's too high of heat, and we all know that that connective tissue is just going to tighten up and make a really tough piece of meat. So that science comes from, all right, now we have to slow cook it and get it to that stalling stage where you want it at about 140 degrees. You want it at 150 degrees. More than that, what ends up happening is that protein gets very tough. And I think that's the difference. If I'm throwing just a nice ribeye on a grill, that's one thing. And if you call it a barbecue, I'm okay with that as a chef. In my head, I know what you're talking about. Well, I got you. And if I'm going to a cookout or, watching an Aaron Franklin video and he's talking about barbecue, I know that's a different barbecue. That's the indirect heat, that's the smoke, that's the wood, that's the temperature gauge. You got the wireless probe in there, monitoring it. You're spraying that protein down with water to keep it moist, and to keep it cool so it doesn't get too hot on the outside. And I think that's a very long answer to what it should be a very basic question.
No, but it's a good answer. And it sounds like your definition of barbecue is really framed around the type of meat or protein that you're cooking, right? Because Korean barbecue we know uses very tender cuts because it's very quick, high heat cooking. But the one that you're talking about, those briskets, those pork butts, lots of connective tissue. They require indirect heat, enclosure, lots of time to monitor moisture, doneness, etc. So, before we get too much into the sort of breakdown of those sort of indirect tough cuts, are there different kind of recommendations you would have for those people that do refer to barbecue on the quick cooking side, the grills of the world, the Korean barbecues? Is there a choice that you feel is better, charcoal or gas? How do we approach those before we get too much into the smoking side?
Well, I'm going to give a basic one to that is I think you have to work with what you have. So, charcoal is good, but it takes a little bit of time. You don't want to use charcoal lighter fluid because that has a very distinct aroma flavor that's going to end up into it. The briquettes that you have, you're going to have to cook for a while and let them cool down a little bit once they burn and they have that radiant heat. And that's really what you're looking for. And gas grill the same way. You can tell something that's been on a gas grill, and I think it's okay. And I would encourage anyone that's listening or into meat and into barbecuing and things like that, just to spend a little bit more care into it. So, if you're going to marinate that piece of meat, and you take it out and you throw it on the grill, we all know that marinade is going to burn way before the meat ever cooks.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into a little bit of the marinade and the science behind it. And I'm a big proponent of, if you want that sauce, if you want that whatever, is put it on after. Like, don't let it burn. Herbs on the outside of it. You see all the horrible TikTok videos with, they put the rosemary on the outside and the pieces of garlic and they throw it on the grill and that all burns up in a heartbeat. And you're like, what are you doing? And, but I think you're right. And if you have the time, if you're doing a chicken breast, that's one thing. If you're doing a ribeye steak, that's another thing. But to your point, those tough cuts of meat, you're doing a London broil, you're doing a brisket, something that's going to take a little bit of time, spend a little bit of time, watch some videos, watch a few of the, Aaron Franklin videos about that smoking, because you're going to get a little bit more flavor. How does salt affect it? Salt is great at tenderizing and breaking it down. And, am I going to use a fruit like, kiwi or pineapple that has the enzyme in it that naturally breaks it down? And the connective tissue. And, I can remember when I was experimenting it with it one time, I put way too much kiwi in my ribs.
Yep.
And like, I had pulled pork from my ribs because it totally broke it down. Like, the bones fell off. It was almost mushy. And I'm like, wow, I used way too much kiwi in mine. And, and I think that's the big thing. Like, if you're going to put it on the charcoal, that's great. Like, but understand that technique, understand that it's not a grill. There's a big difference between the two. And just don't assume that just because you might throw down and cook on a grill out back that, I'm going to go out and do charcoal, or I'm going to buy a smoker and indirect. And yeah, I can do that with, there's a lot of science behind this.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like anyone who's lit a chimney to do a charcoal fire knows that just that process alone takes a lot of time. And then to be able to control your own heat source, there are flavor benefits there for sure. I want to pivot a little bit because you mentioned marinades, and I think that these are opportunities to impart flavor into whatever you do barbecue, whether it's kind of a quick cook or a long term. Are there other tips you would give in regards to like why certain marinades work? Like you mentioned kiwi or pineapple, and anyone who's made a fruit salad the night before knows that that enzyme, that bromelain, will break down things. And are there sort of other? Like a good example is I've heard not to put salt on a steak before, but to put it on after. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there tips that you can share about sort of what marinades are bulletproof, and what seasonings work really well, and what to avoid?
Yeah, and you're 100% right with the salt. Like whenever I teach students about grilling or anything like that, because you can control it, salt pulls out moisture. So if you have a ribeye steak and you salt it 2 hours before, you look at it in the fridge and there's this pool of water underneath it because that salt is pulling out all that moisture. And we all know protein is made up of muscle meat is mostly water. So if you're pulling that all out, you're going to dry that piece of meat out. Definitely anything with acid. So at some point you need a little bit of acid for those marinades. That acid, just like that enzyme in fruit, will help to break it down to make it more tender. A little bit of salt will help because that will also help with that connective tissue to break it down. And I think that's where a lot of people are wrong, is in just going back to that whole on the outside of it, that burnt. I'm a big fan of salad dressings, just taking that high acid one, using that. Some of the better ones, I also use pickle brine. So a lot of people will use pickle brine to marinate some of them. I'm giving up some of the secrets away, and everybody's like, "Oh, pickle brine!" Like you finish a jar of pickles, you've got that brine.
I've heard of that for chicken.
Absolutely, yep. And it's all flavor, and it makes a heck of a fried chicken, by the way. But anyway, so yeah, and I think that's what you want to look for, and going with your flavor. Like, don't try to put so many flavors into it. And barbecue sauce itself is very balanced. And in an educational tool, I talk about this all the time. Like when us as chefs, and you guys will probably know, we taste something and a student will be like, "Chef, it's missing something," and we say, "I already add a little bit of honey." They'll add the honey, and then they come back to you like, "Chef, that's amazing. You're like a god." No, it just was missing the sweetness. We know that 5 flavors. So when a student hands us something to taste and it's missing acidity, or it's missing sweetness or umami or whatever it might be, we know to add that. And barbecue sauce to me is the epitome of all of that, because it has sweet, it has sour, it has, umami, and it's got all of the characteristics you need. And the whole debate of, North Carolina or South Carolina, or I want my vinegar based, you look at the history of that, and that has to do with what cultures and where they settled and where they brought it. So, South Carolina, for example, South Carolina has a lot of mustard based. Well, there's a lot of French and a lot of German people that, settled in South Carolina. Well, that's where they brought over. North Carolina is a little bit more vinegar based, which had a little bit more New England. So all of that comes from our past and what they brought to us here. And the other would be the type of meat. Like, brisket's very inexpensive, tenderloin's very expensive. And you had to adapt, 500 years ago. All right. And even before that, how can I take this cheap piece of meat? You got the aristocrats that would pay for the really tender stuff. And, I'm a peasant and I had all this, meat that they didn't want to eat because they would throw it on a grill or a barbecue back then. And, it would toughen up, and they were like, "We're not eating this. We're rich, and we want the fillets and we want the ribeyes." And so the poor people would take it and then be like, "All right, what do we have to do with it?" They started with boiling it like that, somewhat tenderize it. But then we all know as chefs, you overcook it and it becomes so tough that you chip a tooth on it, So I think that's my answer to that.
No, and Jamie, before you jump in, because I know you have a question, you talk about location. I mean, that also matters with what you said brisket. think about where cows are raised, and it's like the middle of the country, Texas. That's beef barbecue down there, and then you see pigs down in the Carolinas, and that definitely has sort of a footload on what kind of protein they use there.
Oh, definitely, and chicken as well. And when you go to Judge, in I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but they'll bring you out this styrofoam container with kale underneath it, and they have their four components for what they barbecued, and you judge all four of them, and the skill behind that as a judge is that it's not one piece. Now I can take a brisket and I can cook it 100 times and get it so that it's amazing. But can I do the same with chicken because it's a different cut of meat? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And it's a different protein altogether. And then, the ribs, like that's going to be a different cooking method. So the skill of a competition is that you have all four have to be different cooking techniques. You just can't throw them all on the same, smoker and barbecue pit and just assume that they're all going to cook the same.
Hmm.
I did I do want to talk about competition. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and I think this is going to be super super interesting. But before we jump into that, real quick, going back to the barbecue sauces, I love barbecue sauce. My husband makes it. It's a little bit more on the sweet side. It's not the mustard or vinegar based one. But when is the ideal time to put it on your meat? Is it
Ooh,
when it
good
comes off
question.
the grill? Is it when it's still on the grill towards the end? Is it the beginning? When are we putting this on for like if we're looking for the ideal time?
So two things. One would be flavor. So one, you can actually marinate it in ahead of time. So you can definitely take it and marinate it in it. But again, I'm a fan of taking that marinade. So let's say I marinate it for 2 days. I'll take it out, then I'll rinse it off or brush it off. So again, I don't want it to burn too fast. So
So wait,
if
wait,
I
wait.
want,
You're marinating in this like a thick barbecue sauce. Are you thinning it out with
absolutely.
anything?
Nope, just like it
Oh,
is.
all right, all right.
And you can thin it out a little bit, like you can use a vinegar base, which is a little bit thinner. But especially if you have your own flavor, if you like dinosaur barbecue out of Syracuse, or you like any of the other type of barbecues, sauces that are out there, that's what you would use. And again, it's a little bit expensive. I wouldn't do it for 100 people. And then as you grill, you baste it on because you want that bark, you want that caramelization. And it's going to happen. Now, if you're just doing it on a grill, it's going to happen from the heat. The sugars that are in there, the amino acids and the protein, they're going to also, caramelize. So you're going to get that bark on the outside of it. And then have some if you want to put it on afterwards for that nice shine, so that it looks the part. But I baste, and as I baste, and you're going to flip it a lot, and what you're trying to do is control that heat. So if I have let's say the brisket this way, the moisture in it, if I'm doing it at 140 degrees, moisture really isn't evaporating too much because it hasn't reached that high threshold yet. So by going back and forth with it, I'm keeping the moisture in, but I'm also developing the bark on the outside of that, which takes a lot of time. So when you think of like a rotisserie chicken and it moves when it goes around, none of that liquid has the ability over time to drain out on one side. So if you roast a chicken in your oven, the water's going to come down. The water molecules, as it cools, are going to go down. But as it moves, and that's why spigot and those rotisserie is so good because that moisture never gets a chance to really leave. If it's up here and we're rotating it down, now it's coming back down in. It never drips out.
That's an amazing description. It's like church, It's like you see this happening all the time, and you don't truly understand the why. And it's funny because as sort of culinary educators, we always like preach to students that are just learning to like again grill. Don't touch it. Let that sear happen. Like let it alone. And like what you're describing is sort of the opposite. It's like consistent movement to obviously leverage science to work for you.
Yeah, and I think to Chef Schick's question, when to do it, and there's a lot of times that my marinade is going to be different than the end barbecue
Mm.
sauce for that flavor. So if I'm trying to layer flavors into my ribs, I might start with a vinegar based type of a barbecue sauce or a brine, start that with it. Then as I'm cooking it, then I apply the spicy, sweet barbecue sauce that we all love. And I, shellac it on there with the pastry brush just so you don't have the big globs of it or anything like that. And you allow it to soak in a little bit to mix with that protein so that you're getting that bark on the outside. Because once that bark is created, you also have that layer which is going to help to retain moisture. It doesn't stop it. As we all know, searing doesn't stop that moisture transfer, but it helps to slow it down.
You said pastry brush. Do you prefer a pastry brush or do you prefer the sauce mop that they have for like things like barbecue sauce that are thicker?
I like the pastry brush because I can control it better.
Typical chef always
I
wants to
know.
control. So, chef, let's talk about flavor development for a second because you talked about layering flavor. But earlier in the episode, you mentioned Aaron Franklin and how he's sort of like a pillar and a barbecue down in Texas. If you read his cookbook, he actually inspired me to go back to basics a little bit on barbecue because for years I was just, even with seasonings and rubs and marinades, I was just loading on these different complex flavors. And he kind of brought it back. He's like, salt and pepper is all you need and good smoke. So from a judge in sort of the competitive barbecue world, so Jamie, we're going to get into competition. Are there some do's and don'ts that you recommend for people to not overthink it or to think about it more?
Well, I think if you want to get into the competition side, if you want to be that person that's going to try to throw down, I think your first thing is to go work with a competition team. You need to see, because as much barbecue as I've tried and sitting there and trying dozens, and I actually at my table, we got the year I did it with the number one that won. It was out of Great Britain. They won the world competition. And I actually had that opportunity to taste theirs. And you'd be surprised how much it's all similar, but there's a little bit of texture. There's a little bit of tang in the back of your tongue on this barbecue sauce that they did. You look at the color of the meat and you could tell that they've spent the time with the indirect smoke, what kind of wood, because wood even burns differently, and how that smoke is generated. That whole science behind it is something that, you're not going to be able to read because, Aaron Franklin is great, but he's not going to give you all of his secrets, and that winning team isn't going to go out and, say, this is what we do. When you walk around the Royal, the open, and you watch them cooking, yeah, they're cooking, but you don't know what they brined it in. You don't know what type of wood it is. You don't know what temperature it is. You don't know how long it's been. Like, there's a million factors. And then when you taste it, you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And you're like, they've done everything right. The texture, the color, the flavor, the smoke. And it's a labor of love, and you have to love what you do, and you have to have patience.
So on the wood side, I mean, to those people out there, and I think there are few of them, but there are people that would say that the type of wood, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's all about just getting smoke. But you mentioned that different wood burns at different rates. So I would imagine that you are in the camp of the wood does matter. So like, what is the ideal wood, or does it vary depending on what you're cooking?
I think it varies, but it also depends on your barbecue sauce. So going back to your question, Chef Brett, when you layer those flavors, if I'm using a mesquite wood, that has a very different than a pecan wood, because those different are pecans when we put it in with it, not the wood. But you add that component to it, and I gave away a secret there, by the way. Pecans is one of the things. But anyway,
market.
Yeah. Whoop. But I think what it is, to me, I would taste the difference. Somebody that has a refined palate and has gone through the training. And I'll throw a shout out to my wine studies and becoming a somm on the side and learning how to taste wine. And all right, what am I tasting? When I smell it, when I taste it, makes me a better barbecue judge, because you learn all of those different tastes. You learn to look for those. So I think wood does matter. To the common person, no, they're just going to know it's smoked. To a true barbecue person, and a master judge that, I took classes from, could easily tell you the difference with which wood they did based upon the flavor profile. That would take a lot of barbecue, a lot of eating.
I mean, eating sounds like the best part of judging, if you ask me.
And I'm going to make a little bit of this was a shocker to me that nobody warned me about. And you both are going to be like, that sounds disgusting. So we get into this huge room, and all these people, you sit down, and now I'm a table judge, and I'm meeting all these people from around the United States. and they all brought coolers with them. And I'm like, must be they're going to drink while they're eating. No. So they'll bring you out a styrofoam container and have your 4 pieces. You'll take one bite and you watch these people, and this is kind of grossing me out a little bit, all put them in Ziploc bags and then put it in their cooler, because obviously after I taste something, no one else is going to taste it. So, they don't want to waste it. So if I didn't do it, because I was just there for the experience, but these people that do it all the time, they walked away with like coolers filled with like one bite out of, their chicken thighs and their ribs and their brisket, and they would put them in Ziploc bags, and then they would all take them home to I guess eat. And I was a little grossed out about that, but I thought,
Well, it also it's a little bit of overkill too. It's like you can only taste. It's like drinking wine. Like you just take a small sip, because if not, you're going to be overindulged with all these different foods. So you want to manage it a little bit, but it is kind of gross. Hopefully, there's ice in the cooler.
oh, there was. Well, I don't know. I didn't look at it, but I was more like, that's interesting. But I mean, I don't know if I taste this really kick butt, barbecue, and you want to take it home, or, have your significant other like try it, like here, you can go home but it's not going to be the same. It's going to be reheated. They're probably unfortunately going to stick it in a microwave, which kill me right now. But yeah, that's what they'd have to do.
And when you're judging, do you have a favorite item or category that you like to judge? That you're like, oh yeah, this
Um,
is my category. More than one bite.
I think the experimental one, like I think, so you get a lot of times the newbies that come into the scene that think I'm going to try it, but I'm going to do this something far to the left or far to the right. That's not what normal people have done. And I think to me that was the unique category, because sometimes it worked and sometimes you took a bite of it and you're like, oh, that did not work for my palate. And it's tough because it's not if I like it or don't like it. When you judge, whether it's, meat or beer or wine or anything like that, you're not going to like every single thing, but there's categories. So, you're looking, and they'll give you the judging sheet. And on the judging sheet, they'll give you a score, 1 through 5 of the meat. Was it cooked properly? Was the bark cooked properly? Was it, marinated? Was it seasoned? Was it hot? So like, it's very definitive, the results. And why is because, yeah, the team that won where I was at that table, all the other 20 tables in the room that was still all trying barbecue, they didn't get to try it. But because the tasting sheets for everybody on my table raved about this one, and then it would go up to the grand judges, they would then all try it, when we had the best of shows, and everybody had the table favorites, and then they won. And I'm like, oh, I tried that. So that's pretty cool.
On the flip side, or kind of flip side, what is like, in your opinion, what's the hardest thing to judge? And that could be a category, it could be a specific ingredient. Is there something that whenever you're trying it, you're just like, you're kind of overthinking it a little bit? You're like, how do I make sure I, get this right?
I think it's probably the chicken thigh. So when they do that, because brisket is very easy, because if they've cooked it right. Is it juicy? Is it the rendered collagen out of it? Is the connective tissue broke down? With a thigh, you don't get as much of that, and the texture of it is pretty much going to be the same. As long as they really didn't screw it up. So I think the thigh is the chicken thigh is the tough one, because how do you make it tender? How do you make it a little bit better than everybody else's? Because it's kind of universal in itself. It doesn't have all that connective tissue. It has a little bit, but not as much as a brisket, not as much as, the ribs do. So I think that's the challenging part.
And I think it's possible that because, we get chicken thighs so often, more so than, let's say, having like whole barbecue brisket, chicken thighs are way more available, and you see them in more applications and across more different types of cooking mediums too. So that maybe it makes it more difficult. Well, Chef Houghton, this is amazing, and thank you for sharing your incredible
It really was. It was
into the barbecue world.
It's crazy.
So
it's
educational.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, though, we do have a couple just questions, and we're going to make you pick a street on this too, because we want to get your official take on the record as to what you prefer or what you feel is the right answer here. So You have to choose one. There's no like, political middle of the road. I want yes or no, this or that. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So I think this is a no brainer, but I'm going to ask Jamie these questions too, and I'll weigh in as well. But gas or charcoal?
I'm a charcoal fan as long as you don't use lighter fluid.
I would agree. Jamie?
I mean, I think that sounds like the right answer, but at my house we use gas just for convenience, and we never think that far ahead to be like, "Oh, we got to preheat a grill." We're like, "Oh, let's grill." And then we just go turn it on and we don't think
So
hours ahead.
Jamie, I'm going to put you on the record for gas because you
Okay.
could easily walk yourself into the convenience element of that. So I appreciate you speaking for the people who don't dedicate 10 hours to cooking via long,
Happy to
slow heat.
represent us. Happy to
Right?
Well, listen,
represent.
I also cook by gas too, but if I had a preference, I would side with charcoal for flavor and just because it's frankly it's just cool to be able to control your heat source, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a different set of skills that is sort of next level for people really getting into cooking. But yes, gas is convenient. Um, Jeremy, Chef Houghton, beef, brisket, or pork butt? And we're talking low indirect smoking. Got to
For
choose
me
one.
to personal to eat would be the pork because that's going to be juicier. That's going to be easier. But I think if I'm competing, I'm judging you on your brisket because that takes skill. Brisket is the most challenging to barbecue and get perfectly, in starting with the meat and what did it eat and how am I going to cut it and how am I going
Mm.
to, season it? Is it a dry rub? Is it going to be marinated? Is it going to be brine and all of that? And I think that's if you want to throw down, I want to see your brisket. If you just want to have a good time, I'll do a pork.
There you go. Jamie, what do you prefer? Do you prefer brisket or pork butt?
Pork because I don't eat beef.
Well, that's a good answer. But I agree with Jeremy. I think that it is relatively straightforward to make pork butt good. Brisket is very like good brisket is good brisket. It's and if you when you've experienced it, it is next level.
Amen.
So going back to pork a little bit, let's talk ribs.
Mm-hmm.
Baby back or St. Louis?
St. Louis.
Why?
Again, cooking. You have to cook it a little bit harder, a little bit longer. I think baby back are a little bit more tender, and I think they're a little bit easier, to do. I remember I had to do I helped to consult a restaurant to open in Charlotte, and they found this recipe from the late 1800s in a book that or a collection of books that they bought. And they handed it to me, and they're like, chef, we want you to recreate these ribs. And it took me probably 20 times to make these ribs. And let me tell you, they were amazing, but they were baby back. But I St. Louis is what really is that defining again. You want to see skill? Anybody can do the baby back ribs. Let's see some skill with St. Louis.
I love it. Jamie, what do you prefer? Do you have a choice?
I'm googling them right now because I'm not a ribs person.
So while you're frantically Googling, I will say that Chef Houghton and Jeremy, I do prefer St. Louis as well because, again, I have that skill set. But last week when I presented at the UMass conference, we did baby back ribs and we like it was blasphemy. We overcooked them chili style, right? Like, to the
Mhm.
point where the bones came right out. And then we basically made McRib sandwiches. So it depends on what you're doing there. So if you want to make it
Agreed.
into like a, throwback nostalgia McDonald's thing, baby back, overcook them a little bit, you know. But I agree, pork ribs, St. Louis,
Yep.
that's where it's at.
I could see Chef Schick looking like, what's the difference?
It's a coin
I'm
flip
looking
at
at a
this.
graph. I'm looking at a graphic as to where they come from on the animal.
Yep.
Same
So
place.
I'm just going to pass on this one because I haven't eaten them really enough, or maybe at all, to even know. So we're
You
just
need
going
to.
to pass.
I want you to like, kind of get back to us. Ask John what he prefers because I feel like he might have
Okay.
an opinion.
Yeah, he's downstairs. I can text him.
All right, so final two questions, and there's two parts to each one, so we'll kind of go right there. What is the most overrated style of barbecue, and what is the most overrated sauce out there, in your opinion, Chef Houghton?
Mine is I think like the Heinz 47 barbecue sauce. It's very one dimensional to me.
Mm.
And I think the just going right off of what you said with Chili's ribs, and I think that um to me is overrated. I think they not just Chili's ribs, but that style where, like you said, that bone pops right off and it's really mushy. And people think that's the defining moment. You ask somebody, "Oh, how'd your ribs come out? Did the bone pull off?" They're like, "Oh my god, it slid right off." I'm like, "That's in your head. You don't say anything because you don't want to burst their bubble and be like, well, technically you need a little texture there." But that would be my two things. And I think you know going back to the St. Louis ribs. You want to see a skill set? That is baby back ribs. I love my mother to death, but she takes those ribs and she drops them in a pot of boiling water. I'm like, "Mom, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, then I'm going to cook it and then go put it on the grill." And it shrinks like 1/3 each way because you're boiling it and all the flavor out in the water. I'm like, "Oh my god."
So overcooking is a sort of an overrated style, is what you're saying. Jamie, what is the most overrated, or what, I guess, what would you say, like, what's your least favorite sauce style or barbecue style?
Mm, I don't know if I have a least favorite. I've been to some really good like barbecue places, and there's one in Chicago I've been to a couple of times that I really love. And I like to try them all. I kind of go back and forth. I don't like spicy style sauces. My husband makes a really, really sweet style, and I don't mind the mustard once in a while. It depends on what I'm putting it on.
Mm.
If it's a fatty cut of meat, I like the mustard or the vinegar style because it cuts through the fat. If it's chicken, sometimes I like the sweeter styles, but it's just I I don't know that I have a least favorite. And sometimes I the meat is just so tasty that I don't put the sauce on it and I just eat it as is, which I know it's weird. I'm we
No.
were just talking about, this is going to be a tangent for a second, but we were just talking about this the other day, my husband and I. Our fridge is full right now, but there's nothing in it but condiments. But I am not a huge condiment person, so I don't know why we have so many condiments. So yeah, I'm not a big ketchup person in general. I'm not a big dipper. I don't know. So I guess I don't have like it depends, just not spicy. And I pretty much like them all. It depends on what I'm eating it with. I think there's context for me. Am I having some tangy slaw or am I having some rich mayo slaw with this meal? I got to put it together.
So I kind of side with Chef Houghton on this, in the sense, different protein, but same kind of philosophy of overcooking. I am not a huge pulled pork fan. And not that I don't enjoy meat that's cooked to that, like, ability, that doneness where you can shred it. But I don't like people that shred it ahead of time. Like, I'm a big fan of getting a larger protein on the plate and then being able to pull it, myself. I think that it maintains a little bit more of the quality. And as far as sauce, I'm not a big Texas barbecue sauce fan. I like heavy tomato. It's just not, I like beef, Texas beef barbecue, but I'm more on your side, Jamie, where skip the sauce. Just keep it pure. So final question is, what is the most underrated sauce in your opinion and style of barbecue, or you can combine them. It's up to you. Chef Houghton?
So I'm going to maybe get a bad look from both of you because I think one of the most underrated, and I would love to know, is McDonald's barbecue sauce. And you're all going to be like, "What?" And I don't know if they've ever changed their formula or whatever it is, but to me, it's the epitome of the most balanced barbecue sauce you can find. And everybody out there is like, "So Chef Hote needs at McDonald's." No, I just use their barbecue sauce because I don't eat any of their food. But so I get their barbecue sauce. So if
Wait,
you're
you
out
don't
there,
even get their French fries because their French fries are pretty good.
I do dip them in there. But then I watched
And like
about,
a McFlurry, like I'm not against the McFlurry here,
well,
but
But
she's
if
giving
you
a
think
shout out.
about it, the amount of sort of brain power that's going into making this shelf stable, consistent sauce. I mean, this is why, and like a few weeks ago we interviewed our dean. Like, this is why I feel like we're doing the right thing in culinary education, because we're creating those types of leaders, right? We're not just creating people that are going to, or training people that are going to go work in restaurants. We're training people that are going to become entrepreneurs and lead the future of food, and that is creating mass produced foods at some point. So It's interesting.
It
Jamie,
is.
what is your most underrated style of sauce? Jamie lost sound for a second, so I'll go here, Chef.
Yeah, go ahead. Why
Um,
don't you tell us, Chef Britt?
I think that the most underrated or the sauce that, and this is not a specific brand, this is just the style.
Oh,
I think the one that flies under the radar, but is probably the most versatile in all of cooking, is Alabama barbecue.
mm,
And I think because, and for those who don't know, it's a mayo-based barbecue. It's white. But if you think about the application for that, from chicken to fish, right? As a marinade, as a sort of final sauce, I think it is not as revered as its sort of contemporaries, which would be like sort of the South Carolina, North Carolina. Like I think it gets overshadowed, and I feel like that's a disservice because I'm speaking specifically sort of lighter white meat proteins. I mean, it probably wouldn't work great for beef, but who knows?
and I want to give a shout out to Q39 as well. It's out of
Yes.
have you had that?
No, but I
I
know you have, and you sing its praises.
Oh my gosh. Like if anybody's out there and wants to try some, we I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but slap your mama good is a term we use in the kitchen because you try something like, oh my God, my mom never cooked like this. But it is an amazing barbecue sauce. They won the Royal many years ago. Then they opened up their own barbecue place out in Kansas City. And if anybody ever gets there, that's my hands down. You're unbelievable from the ribs to the beans to everything in the restaurant. But their sauces, I give out as gifts all the time because they're just spot on.
Killer. Jamie, you're back. Thank you. What for you? What's your favorite or most underrated sauce?
Well, I'm just going to go out on a very broad limb here and just say I do think barbecue sauce on its in a category on its own can be semi underrated because it's usually like some good ones are pretty balanced. They're most of them are sweet with a little acidity. They're good hot, they're good cold, they're good room temp. I think they're super versatile and as we just learned, we can marinate meat in them, we can finish meat with it. I think on its own barbecue sauce as a category might just be an underrated sauce in general.
Well, on that note,
That's where
e-
that's where I'm going to
everyone should
stand.
go out and barbecue.
Yeah.
Well, Chef Houghton, thanks again for joining us and entertaining all our technical issues. But I appreciate your insight on this. It clearly is something that we all can benefit from. So enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You
Yes,
guys have
thank
a
you.
great summer as well.